Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we have the Secretary of the Budget in Pennsylvania on our show. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to probe around and see what we can find out about what's going on with the big budget debate in the Capitol, and then we're going to have a legislative update, all that when Pennsylvania Newsmakers returns.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. A little bit of shameless promotion. We've got the February sweeps numbers. I want to thank the viewers around the state and on Susquehanna Valley on WGAL. Other than Meet the Press, we are the #1 Sunday talk show. And it's about you and your allegiance to the show, your loyalty in watching the show. We try to deal with state issues, something that a lot of other folks do not do. And because we have great guests, great journalists, cabinet secretaries, governors, senators, they come on this program and we have good, decent chats about the big issues that confront our state and the nation. And joining me is the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Budget Secretary. I'll get that out. Charles Zogby. He's been on the show a few times. Mr. Secretary, welcome.
Nice to be with you.
I had to get
Terry.
that mouthful out. But look, let's get to the issues. All right. The governor makes a recommendation. You put the budget together, spend a little bit less money than last year. No new taxes. So far, so good. It goes to the legislature. Now there's a debate, as you would expect, over these features. Now, recently, the Senate Appropriation Chairman Jay Corman from Center County says, big scramble over what money is available. What money is he talking about, and what is the scramble about? I'll let you amplify that.
Terry, I think what the senator was referring to is just a recognition that things are very, very tight fiscally. We're right now, to date, nearly $500 million underestimate our official revenue estimate that we put out back in June. Things have improved slightly. We're predicting our last estimate out of the Budget Office, Department of Revenue, that was that by the end of June we'd be $719 million underestimate. That looks like it might be improving slightly. But I think the reality is that however we end up, it's going to be a very tight year fiscally. And the governor's budget, as you know, made a number of reductions that have caused some agita in the General Assembly and the public. And I think that's going to be the debate between now and when we enact the budget later in the spring.
Let me make sure I understand this. If the deficit continues, let's say it's $500 million more than you thought it would be last year when you put it together, does that mean you'll have to make $500 million more in additional cuts? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think the governor's budget that he put out that predicts a end of year deficit of $719 million is really probably at this point the low water mark. We've seen some improvement in the economy, some improvement in our revenues. Whether that really translates in an ability to add back items into the budget and spend a little more, I think remains to be seen, and we watch that very closely.
Let's talk about some of these areas of the cutbacks that, as you point out, that are obviously controversial. We all recognize that. Let's take a look, first of all, at the education budget. Higher education, I mean, last year you recommended some pretty substantial cuts to the state-owned and state-related schools. They were reduced a bit. Do you expect the same thing to happen, given what you've heard in the legislature, that there'll be some adjustments to what you have recommended where higher ed is concerned? I
think higher education is clearly an area of priority for members where they believe that the governor's proposed cuts are perhaps too deep. Again, you know, watching, for instance, a month of budget hearings in the General Assembly, I heard a number of members, you know, speak to one area or another that they're concerned about. But I didn't hear anybody talk about where they would take money to pay for it. So I think that's the difficulty. Any dollar we add back, we have to find a dollar elsewhere.
That's a great. Are you saying then that you would expect members, if they want to restore something, to say to the administration, because obviously you've got a big part to play in this, that show us where you'll cut? I mean, is that a reasonable expectation on your part?
I think, you know, it's easy to talk about things that you don't like and monies you'd like to restore, right? It's a much more difficult challenge, and the challenge that the governor faced is, you know, he doesn't want to raise taxes on Pennsylvania families and businesses. It's clear that they don't want their taxes raised. So living within our means after 8 years of profligate spending, you know, how do you do that? He has to make choices. He doesn't have the luxury of just saying, I want more here, without having to find some place to pay for it. And so I think that's the challenge to the General Assembly. You don't like a particular reduction. Where do you find the offset?
Okay. We're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the basic education, the schools, and then get to some of the human service cuts. We're going to deal with these areas, I think, that are, obviously we're not going to talk about the things that there's kind of a general acceptance that, you know, the legislature is going to do. We'll talk about the features of it that are a little more controversial. Not with you, with us. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. All right, we're talking with Charles Zogby, he's the Pennsylvania Budget Secretary, about the recommendation the governor made to the General Assembly about the budget. We've introduced that. All right, let's talk about the basic ed. The complaint that I hear from the folks in the school districts is you're giving them, you're doing the block grants, you're giving them more flexibility but less money.
Well, that's absolutely not true, because what the block grant does, Terry, as you mentioned, is it takes basic education, Social Security, and transportation dollars, all funded at last year's levels or higher. So there's no cuts whatsoever in those line items. But we've bundled them together, or proposing to bundle them together in a block grant, send them to the school districts, give them more flexibility. You've seen, you know, school districts renegotiate, for instance, their transportation contracts. They're saving money. Those savings are going to go to the benefit of the school district, not the state. If districts are having to make reductions in personnel, paying less in Social Security, those savings are going to go to the school district, not the state. So we think this is a winner for school districts overall.
Is your point about this from your point of view, encouraging more efficiency across the board in many state programs? I mean, when the governor ran for office, I mean, he talked about doing a department-by-department review to see what functions the state could divest. I remember this very clearly. Right. Those of us, you know, we covered that campaign very carefully. Is the budget, in addition to no new taxes and reducing spending, about driving efficiency throughout all the departments and programs? Absolutely.
You look at what the governor's done. He's held the line on taxes. We've cut administrative spending in state government by 6%. And then we're trying to wring savings out of the system, basically delivering the same or more services for less dollars. You know, you look at, for instance, our county human service delivery system. You look at our school districts where, you know, 500 districts, all with their, you know, six-figure superintendents and six-figure front office personnel. There's a ton of administrative costs in the system that don't go to provide services or education to young people in the classroom. We've got to wring savings out of this system, make it more efficient, and stretch the tax dollars as far as we can. And that's part of the governor's focus here in these proposals.
Yeah, one of the other issues, I'm dealing again with these sort of controversial issues that, you know, obviously the legislature will deal with and you'll have to in turn respond, has to do with mental health and social service agencies and the cuts there. And, you know, there have been rallies and concerns about those cuts. What's the exact nature of the cuts to this human service area of the budget?
Well, what we did, Terry, is that because a lot of our human services delivery system is wrapped around medical assistance, about 80% of our DPW budget, $10 billion, is tied up in federal programs that give us very little to no room in terms of flexibility to manage more efficiently. So what we did is we took state-funded only programs, a number that you mentioned. We put them together in a block grant. Now we've made a 20% reduction, about $130 million savings. That's in part to balance the budget. But again, here we're looking at combining these programs, giving them to the counties in a block grant. So that they can manage more flexibly. Right now, we have a system that, you know, you can only spend dollars in the silo. and the incentive structure is to spend all the money or you have to send it back. We want counties to spend more smartly, being able to move money to areas of priority, and we think that those things combined, they can make efficiencies that will lessen the impact of the reduction.
Before I let you go, I want to go. Scott Detrow is going to come on. You know, he does the StateImpact. He's all energy stuff. Probably, you know, knows as much about this as anybody. I'll follow this up with him. Are you comfortable with the DEP's ability to regulate this tremendous expansion of the Marcellus Shale? You know, the deep drill welling that's going on, deep well drilling, get that right. Are you comfortable that that the Department of Environmental Protection is on top of all this? You know, it's debated about, you know, the environmental hazards. What's the comfort level with the administration?
Well, I think, for my part at least, I take my cues from Secretary Krantzer, an incredibly capable individual who I think is well respected across the spectrum. The Secretary believes that he has the resources and the manpower. A lot of the monies that go to fund those activities are off budget. They're funded through fees and fees and other things outside of the general fund budget. Yeah. The Secretary believes he has adequate resources, and I think he'd be the first to step up and say that if he feels that we're somehow compromising safety or the environment, environmental protection in those activities, and he needed more resources, I know we'd hear from him. Yeah. We haven't heard that, and so I feel comfortable that we're well placed there. All
right, thanks for coming on. We're going to try to get you on when we get into the real push towards in June when the legislature does it. Thanks for coming. All right, we're going to get a little legislative update. John Micek from the Morning Call and Scott Detrow, StateImpact PA. They'll be on in a few minutes.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Joining me, as often is the case, of two of the state's leading reporters. We got John Micek from the Allentown Morning Call. He's on the program a lot, and Scott Detrow used to be. I don't know, what did you do before you get onto all this energy? WITF, right? No, you were.
I covered the Capitol for Pennsylvania's public radio stations.
There you go. And he was a frequent guest. All right, I want to get onto the Santorum and the presidential election, but the cracker gas processing plant out in Western PA, one of those big energy job-producing operations. 30 seconds. What's it about?
What's up with that? This was a couple of weeks ago now, and it was a big economic win for the Corbett administration. Pennsylvania had been in a fight with Ohio and West Virginia for the rights to host this plant that it takes natural gas and turns it into plastic-based product. Big job. It's going to create tens of thousands of jobs and billions and billions of dollars in profits. Yeah. So it's still several years away, and it's still a tentative announcement. Shell said they're picking Pennsylvania, but they have more studies to do.
Got it.
But the interesting thing here is, Governor Corbett has been slammed pretty repeatedly throughout his administration for being, a cards close to the chest guy, very quiet, not too communicating with legislators, keeping things behind the scenes, not communicating well. So the interesting thing was in the months leading up to this, Ohio's governor, John Micek, and West Virginia's governor, Earl Ray Tomblin, were all over the place telling everybody exactly what they were doing to woo this plant, passing legislation, making a big deal.
And they didn't get it.
And you heard nothing from the Corbett administration, and it seemed like they weren't doing anything, and it turns out behind the scenes they were working very hard to get this plant.
All right, we got a presidential election. If you didn't know, nomination struggle. John Micek, Santorum, looks like Rick Santorum, Pennsylvania member of Congress for 16 years. Looks like Romney seems to be cementing this. We got Wisconsin, District of Columbia, and Maryland on Tuesday. Give us an update about what you think. How's that campaign going? You know him. You've covered him.
Yeah, I mean, we're 5 weeks out now, or 4 weeks out, as everyone's been saying, from the Pennsylvania primary. Scene now is very much a do-or-die time for Senator Santorum. There's something that if he might not even make it to Pennsylvania, but with the super PAC money, he can probably soldier through. Something that Pennsylvania might be a last stand. It's going to be a difficult row for him to hoe in Pennsylvania. You saw that just this last weekend here, the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference in Harrisburg. Senator Santorum came out and he gave the keynote address. Was pretty enthusiastically received by this crowd of movement conservatives. But if you talk to them individually, it became clear that there was still some bridge building that he needed to do with these folks. There are some who are still upset all the way back to 2004 with his endorsement of Arlen Specter over Pat Toomey in that very closely contested Senate race. And others about his support for earmarks, his absence from the state political scene. So, and that's his base. So the fact that he has to mend fences there is indicative of the problems he will probably run into when he gets here.
Scott, it seems, and I don't know how closely you've been following this delegate hunt, but you need this magic 1144. That number's,
burn into your brain.
We wake up thinking about 1144, and he's got this couple hundred vote gap, and he does, given proportionality in the way delegates are picked. Is the goal to stop Romney as opposed to win? It seems to me. Go ahead.
Right. Well, back in 2008, the Democrats had this proportional breakdown, and the Republicans, and it was winner take all. So you had that situation where the Obama-Clinton race kind of dragged down. It didn't matter who won; it was about an even split, and that's kind of what you're into now. So I've seen two schools of thought on Pennsylvania. One is that it's important to point out our delegates are not locked to the vote result. So I've heard people make the argument that Romneyites have most of these delegates locked up. All they care about is delegates. Maybe they'll try and minimize the state and focus elsewhere. I've also heard that, if Romney can beat Santorum in Pennsylvania, that kind of closes the deal on the Santorum campaign. I think, Newt Gingrich, it's very clear, is not running to be president. He's running to not have Mitt Romney be president. It's almost like, well, if I can't be president, no one can be president. You've seen less of that with Santorum.
We're going to run to a break, and then we'll... John, I want to ask you about some of these other candidates. They don't seem to have a presence. We've got a big event coming up in Lancaster where 3 of the candidates are going to literally address the Lancaster County Republican Party when they have their meeting. That's a little unusual. We'll check that out and more after we return from this quick break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, we're talking about Senator Santorum's campaign for the presidency, the primary, the long drawn-out primary, but caucus nomination struggle. Before I do that, you want to follow John Micek on Twitter. It's @capital_ideas. If you want to follow Scott Detrow, get a lot of updates about energy @Scott Detrow on Twitter. I don't know what about Facebook and all these other things. We'll let those guys worry about it. All right, John. In Pennsylvania, does this really come down to whether Santorum can survive? I mean, he's got to win. My premise is, and tell me if you think I'm right, I think if he just wins narrowly, he may lose. Doesn't he have to win reasonably well in a state that he...
I mean, keep in mind, this is a state that rejected him by, 18 points in 2006. This isn't one of those states where where a win is not win is not losing. It's one of these things where he has to show strong. I mean, this is home turf. Yep. And if he doesn't, then I think there's serious questions going forward.
Yeah, what's it? Go ahead.
You have to look at it outside of Pennsylvania as well. I mean, I'm not doing the math in my head right now, but he's so far behind. If he has any chance of being the nominee, he has to win enormously in every state going forward, almost, it seems.
And even there, as you point out, it's hard to win the delegates. There are 98 delegates in these three, in Wisconsin, Maryland, and D.C. They're proportional, some winner take all. No one is going to come out of those 3 contests, although Santorum's not even on the ballot in the District of Columbia. So all of those, I think it's 19 delegates, will go to Mr.
Was that a
Romney.
1-to-1 for all the Republicans who live in the district?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's
They're
like
having their-
Republicans in Philadelphia, right? There are
all meet for breakfast and vote.
Yeah. There aren't very many of them. But what I mean, is this sort of, if it goes to PA, John Micek, and he doesn't win big, do you think this now just becomes an academic question? I mean, as you point out, he's got to win here and win sizably, or it's over.
I think that's true. I think that from Senator Santorum's perspective, it's that he wants to slog this out, presumably, until the convention. He may well be able to limp along as a president. And I think I agree with Scott. At this point, as much for Gingrich, it's not about winning. It's about making life difficult for Mitt Romney.
I think
maybe
you're right.
Senator Santorum has his eye on something else, realizing that just the delegate count being what it is, he's not likely to make it up between now and then.
I noticed that 15 state senators, including the majority leader, the president pro tem, and the appropriation chair in the Senate, have endorsed Santorum, but more members of the congressional delegation have endorsed Romney, plus Governor Ridge. I mean, you do have this sort of division that's going on that's really fascinating, isn't it?
Well,
about who supports whom.
I think with the Senate delegation, you have to look at the fact that Jake Corman is a member of Senate leadership, and he's very close to Rick Santorum. So I think that's a factor there.
Yeah, good point.
But you have Governor Corbett not endorsing.
And Pat Toomey, Senator Toomey.
Right. But Pat Toomey did one of those all but endorse over the weekend, talked about how he was very confident with Mitt Romney's conservative credentials and talked that up. I think that was kind of as close as you're going to get to an endorsement. Corbett's interesting because you have a close Corbett ally, Brian Nutt, his former campaign manager, is directing the Santorum campaign in Pennsylvania.
But does that mean that the governor is probably legitimately neutral with, he's got the budget and all these, does that make sense to you for him not to get heavy-handed in this?
Typically, they stay out of it until just before anyway. Historic, if they look at it, so maybe a week before the primary or something, the governor will come out and perhaps make an endorsement, or perhaps not. I mean, it's tricky for him because He's got
friends on both sides, right? Yeah.
What was intriguing, though, was the press conference where all of these establishment Republicans came out for Governor Romney, Alan Novak, Bob Asher.
State chairman, a big, powerful, Bob Asher, big fundraiser.
The Montgomery County money man. And, one of the reporters in the crowd said, to Mr. Novak, you were instrumental in Senator Santorum's rise. What is it about him that doesn't scream president to you?
And what did he say?
And Mr. Novak said, well, Rick can't, and then very quickly, abruptly caught himself and said, well, Mitt can. And it became pretty clear that it's a fairly naked calculus in their eyes about who is capable of winning and who might be able to capable of being President Obama.
Yeah, we have about 50 seconds up, but there's another point. I think a lot of office holders, particularly members of Congress, think that if with Romney they're concerned about their own re-elections. No, and who can win.
I mean, really, these endorsements, I think obviously agreeing with the candidate, thinking it's the best candidate, plays a role, but it's more, it's power calculations. How can this guy help me? How can I help this guy? How do I cover my behind and pick the guy who's most likely to win?
All right, look, great analysis here. We'll find out. April 24th is a big day. All right, it's a big day. It's whatever it is over the weekend when you're watching this show. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and stay well.